This is video 63, and the title is First and Last Canoe Trips. I bought a canoe. Only got 2 trips, but it was exciting. This story takes place in 1978. It had been a long time since I had a canoe. I always liked a large canoe versus a boat because paddling can be done smoothly and quietly. I decided to buy a 17-foot Grumman aluminum canoe. A friend at work, Ray, had just purchased a 17-foot fiberglass canoe as well. It was March and we worked 7-day rotation. That meant we only had one weekend a month off, but it was 4 days, Saturday through Tuesday. On our upcoming weekend, the weather was projected to be pretty nice for that time of year, mid-50s for daytime temperatures. P&G was starting up a new plant in Belleville, Ontario. All their new team managers came to Mahoopany and were assigned to train with an operating team for a period of 6 weeks. One of these new managers was named Francis. He was a pretty nice guy, and somehow Francis got partnered with me to go on a Susquehanna River trip, accompanied by Ray and Billy. They were 2 of my co-workers. Billy was also a deputy fish and boat officer and fellow hunter and trapper education instructor. We worked together a lot on night patrol, and we taught along with Lou, hunter and trapper ed, for about 20 years. Billy is director in the Pennsylvania Trappers Association still today. Francis told me he had a lot of experience with canoes. That was good. We made our plan to bring food and drink and other required equipment for a canoe trip from Laceyville to Tunkhannock. On the river, that was about 25 miles. Route 6 parallels the river all the way down except in one area. The river makes almost a complete loop about halfway through the trip. From an aerial view, it looks like a large omega symbol. That's why it's a number of miles farther by river than road. The day came and we did the equipment shuffle as we had to have a vehicle at each end. We got ready to launch at Laceyville. Francis was of smaller stature than me, so we put the cooler, etc., up on his end. He would be in the front. As we were getting in the canoe, he said that these canoes were different than what he was used to, as there were no arms out to the side. I asked him if he meant pontoons. Yep, that's what they were called. Oh boy, paddling a canoe with pontoons is a lot different than a straight-up canoe. So I told him to keep the canoe reasonably straight on course, that he needed to do 2 to 4 strokes on one side and then switch and repeat on the other. I would do the opposite in the back of the canoe. That part didn't work out too well. He did 10 to 15 strokes and caused us to do large zigzags. I was trying to counter them for the entire trip. I was totally spent after 25 miles of that. It was a nice day to be on the river. It was a fairly harsh winter that year. Francis went back to Canada the next week or so. Ray and Billy and I talked about another canoe trip. This time, we'd go down to Tunkhannock Creek from Nicholson to Tunkhannock. I think it would be about 8 to 10 miles. I'm not sure at this point. I needed a partner, so I asked Gene, one of our electricians, if he wanted to join us. He thought it would be fun and agreed to go. This time the weather in late April was colder. It was only about 30 degrees, but we were outdoor guys and we dressed for it. We wore full-size life jackets that helped too. Thinking ahead this time about weight distribution, I brought a burlap bag and put some sand in it to make up for the difference between Gene and myself. We stuffed the bag in the tip of the canoe, Gene in front and me in back. We didn't have to do the vehicle shuffling, as Ray's wife was going to stay ahead of us and film us as we approached and passed under the bridges. We realized we may have made a big mistake about 3 minutes after launching. Mountain streams are like a roller coaster. If you go down a steep part, you may go over a rise next. Well, you may also run into log jams. That was the first thing we encountered. This log jam was on a steep drop and water was running over it. The drop was about 10 feet. Billy and Ray were ahead of us in Ray's fiberglass canoe. We had to go over it, as it was spring and the water was high and fast. We binged and banged down and over the log pile, then got back into clear water. Billy and Ray were about 200 yards ahead of us. We were going pretty fast. From a distance, I could see an island coming up. Billy and Ray were to the right side of the creek, and we were to the left, more in the channel. All at once, Ray and Billy jumped out and grabbed their canoe. Then I saw why. There was a large tree down. It spanned the channel from the bank to the island. Ray's canoe was smooth bottom. Mine had a 1/4-inch keel the full length, and we were in the channel of whitewater. We didn't have much time, and back paddling was not an option. We could not turn the canoe either. A first glance at the tree, it looked like we would be able to lay backwards and shoot under the tree. As we got closer, it became evident that was not an option. There was a large branch sticking down into the water in the center of the opening we hoped to navigate. Keep in mind, this all happened in about 150 yards of whitewater. We were at the log. I told Gene to grab that branch that was sticking up out the top side. He stood and grabbed the branch. The canoe thumped the tree and turned sideways and flipped upstream. It immediately filled with water and wedged against the log, acting like a dam. Just before we dumped, I noticed either Ray or Billy was taking pictures. The next thing I knew, I was pushed through some branches and out the other side. I was able to swim over towards the island and stand up. I looked back to check on Gene, who was hanging on a good-sized branch previously. Now Gene was nowhere in sight. The water had dragged him off the branch and under. He was on the tree root end of the log. He wasn't coming up. He was under for what seemed an eternity. We thought sure he had drowned. Nope. He popped up on the downstream side. Thank you, Lord. Gene had a tough time fighting through the tree roots while the water was also pushing him. Well, Ray and Billy took Ray's canoe on down to the next bridge, as Ray's wife would be waiting there for us to pass. Gene and I needed to stay warm, so we climbed the bank and started walking the other direction to my truck. Now it took a while for Ray and Billy to meet with Ray's wife, as she thought she had missed us and had hurried down to the next bridge about 5 miles away. Not seeing us there for a time, she came back upstream and met the guys. During the time Ray's wife was trying to find us, Gene and I were walking along Route 92 back towards Nicholson. About 2 miles out of town, there still is a nice stone farmhouse on the north side with a pillared front porch. Gene and I were walking by. The farmer came out to check his mail. We said good morning to him, but all he did was stare at us with his mouth open. Picture this, 2 guys walking down the road. It's 30 degrees, and we had just taken a good dunking in a whitewater stream. We kept our life jackets on to preserve what body heat we could, but our entire outerwear was completely ice covered. Ray and crew caught up and gave us a ride to my truck. We agreed to meet over on Tamarack Road at the Fish Commission Public Access in about 3 hours, after Gene and I had time to get home and get warmed up. Gene lived a few miles north of Tunkhannock, and I lived at Westgate off Russell Hill, about 3 miles west of Tunkhannock. We got home and I got out of my wet things. I took a couple aspirin and covered up in my recliner. I was cold to the core. A nasty knot developed in my inside as my body was getting over the shock of being flash frozen. It hurt. After an hour or so, I felt pretty good and got ready to retrieve my canoe. I took a length of chain, some rope, and a come-along. Billy was going to bring his chainsaw and whatever he thought we would need. The same for Ray. We would have plenty of gear. Of course, we weren't sure what we would find, since the canoe was effectively damming 2/3 of the creek in that location. Gene didn't come back as he had plans for later that evening. We met at the desired place and time and parked our vehicles just off the access lane and started to get out our equipment. About that time, another vehicle came into the area. It was the son of the landowner. I went to school with him. Well, I walked up to Tom's vehicle and he got out and promptly stuck a 12-gauge shotgun in my face. Whoa, man, what the hell is this about? You know who I am, and you know Bill, too. Point that gun somewhere else. Well, according to him, we were trespassing. Not so. We were on the public access created by agreement with the Fish and Boat Commission. Billy was a deputy. Lou and I didn't get our game commission credentials until August of '78. We had just taken our civil service test. Granted, we weren't on official business, but it was a public access. Not anymore after that run-in. We packed up and pulled out of there. We went back around to Route 92 and drove down to the farm on the other side of the creek. We talked with the farmer and explained our situation. He didn't have any trouble driving down to the creek. The only difference was there was a 20-foot high rock ledge drop-off to the stream bed. Well, we tied a rope to a tree and rappelled down the cliff. One of us went first, and then the saw and other equipment was lowered down, and then the other two guys rappelled down. Billy tried to use the chainsaw first. It would have been a quick job, but the bar needed to be about twice as long. Chainsaws don't run too well underwater. We didn't have much choice now. We secured the canoe with a chain and rope and used a come-along hooked to a tree and pulled the canoe out sideways. If the canoe was fiberglass, we agreed it would have been destroyed. The aluminum held together, but didn't look pretty. We did the necessary hauling of canoe and equipment up and over the cliff, one or two items at a time, and climbed out of there. I went home with my nice new, one-time used, $300, slightly bent-up canoe. I went back to the store where I bought the canoe and told the salesman I needed some canoe parts. He thought I meant a small trolling motor or a sail. Nope, I need actual parts. New gunnel rails, cross supports, and a big bag of rivets. Well, I got the parts in about a week. It took me about 4 months to rebuild my canoe. One thing I learned was that aluminum stretches when deformed like that. Now one side was a half-inch longer than the other. There were 280 rivets on each side holding the rails on. I had to drill out each one, remove the bent rail, and install the new rail one rivet at a time. I used a push block on the inside against the head and a ball peen hammer to peen over the other end. It was tedious work. I got it all back together and it was good to go, but just not real pretty in one spot. The canoe cost me $300. The parts were $52. I couldn't get anyone to go fishing with me or even for a ride in it now. So I sold it to some guy for $50. I have not been anywhere near a canoe since. I have copies of the pictures that were taken stashed somewhere. In one of the pictures, my orange ski cap is visible on top of the water. The only thing is, I was still wearing it, but was not in sight. I was totally submerged in ice water. The picture above was at our launch point on the Spadini farm just east of Mickelson. In light of what happened with us, I strongly advise if you're going to go on a stream trip like that in high water to walk the route first to see what hazards there are. Our trip almost became fatal. So, that's the end of my canoe stories. As usual, I wish everyone all the best.